The public hearing of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee will come to order. Normally, in the past couple of months, we didn't have to introduce ourselves because everybody in the room knew who we were, and we knew who they were. Now, some of those same characters are, well, the same characters are here at the Horseshoe, but some of you are the same ones out in the audience, but I see a lot of new faces out there. So I think we will start, because Representative McFadden just came in and he's catching his breath here, I think we'll start at the other end. How's that? Representative Strang-Burgess?
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Meredith Strang-Burgess, representing House District 108, which is Cumberland, a little teeny bit of North Yarmouth, and the beautiful islands of Long Island, and also soon to be the town of Chebeague Island. Thank you.
Yes, that's my cell phone. I'm Representative Bobby Muse. I'm from District 97. I live in Freiburg, and I represent Freiburg, Brownfield, Hiram, Parsons, and Porter.
My name is Charlie Harlow. I represent District 116, which is the northern end of Portland and the rural end of Portland.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Sutherland. I represent District 7, which is a little part of Presque Isle, and it includes Washburn, Mapleton, Chapman, Castle Hill, some unorganized communities, and also Masardis and Oxbow, and in the southern Aroostook area, Littleton, Hammond, and Monticello.
Yes, good morning. Ed Finch, District 84, Fairfield, Rome, and Smithfield.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm Jackie Norton. I represent House District 15, which is part of Bangor.
Good morning. I'm Peter Bowman from Senate District 1, Kittery, York, Ogunquit, Elliott, and South Berwick, and I reside in the first mentioned town, Kittery.
Good morning. I'm Libby Mitchell.
Would somebody punch that one?
It's right here.
Thank you. I'm Libby Mitchell from Senate District 24, which is Kennebec County, Augusta, and surrounding communities.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Peter Edgecombe, representing Caribou.
Good morning. I'm Howard McFadden, representing District 30, which is 32 or 33 towns and unorganized townships in Washington and Hancock counties.
Well, now that we've got those formalities out of the way, we'll start the public hearing on LD 123, which is an act to establish a labor center within the University of Maine system, and we will hear those. We'll hear from the sponsor, who I think, well, let's see, Representative Tuttle.
There he is.
Ah, there you are. Yes, sir.
But being back at the mill gate when you wanted to work, you raised your hand.
You have far more history than some of us, sir.
Well, yes, probably Jackie, yes.
Some of us are brand new, so.
Well, I feel like some days I feel brand new too, Peter.
And it's not all bad, let me tell you.
No, it isn't. No, if you can,
And you know, everybody's got to be brand new sometime. I've learned that as I've gone through life.
That's right, yes. Senator Bowman and Representative Norton and members of the Education Cultural Affairs Committee. My name is John Tuttle. I represent the citizens of District 143, which is pretty much the east side of Sanford and Springvale. I am before you today to present and ask for your support of LD 123, an act to establish a labor center within the University of Maine system. This bill would establish a labor education center at the University of Southern Maine to provide labor education and policy development for students and community organizations. I submitted this bill to address a significant need in our educational community. Labor education throughout the country. There are a handful of universities and colleges that offer comprehensive labor education programs. This bill would add the University of Southern Maine to the ranks of schools that provide labor education. which would help to make it a destination for students interested in these important issues. The Labor Center envisioned in the bill would begin by adding support and enrichment to the courses already offered in the labor study minors. It is my hope that the program would eventually expand, providing there is a significant student demand to offer an undergraduate major and a master's degree in labor and working class studies. By adding a labor center to Southern Maine, it also stands to, I think, benefit the community. The Labor Center would be able to provide important service to the local community, such as trainings and policy workshops and issues like compensation, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, and labor law. The bill calls for a general fund appropriation of $169,480 in fiscal year 2007 and 2008. And $174,136 in fiscal year 2008 and 2009 to establish and maintain a center. The funds would support 3 jobs: a full-time center director, a part-time faculty director, and a part-time administrative assistant. I would thank the committee for listening to me and would hope that I would gain your favorable consideration on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Tuttle. Are there any questions of Representative Tuttle? Representative Edgecombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these funds would be put into the university budget, and then they would come out of the university budget? Is that okay?
That's correct, Peter. Yep.
Was there someone to my left, that Representative Finch?
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
I'm confused on one thing here. The bill has specific dollar amounts for '08 and '09.
Right.
But the fiscal note that comes with it says insufficient data, and additional costs cannot be determined at this time. Is that a contradiction?
Well, I think that probably with the deliberations of the committee, maybe we can answer that question. I was my same question when I saw the fiscal note, and as you know, sometimes when you deal with that office, you get responses that sort of makes you scratch your head, and this is one of them. But I think that working with the committee, Ed, I think that we can get that answer. It might have been early in the process, but as far as the funding aspect, that'll be probably one of the more important parts of the bill.
Thank you.
Representative Sutherland.
Thank you. Again, going back to the fiscal note that we were given, and searching my memory, I thought there was an office or a department at the University of Maine that I have visited before that was certainly provided me with information at the time that I was looking for it.
Right.
You're talking about adding another center at USM?
Right.
Although there currently
is one at Orono, but I think there are sort of distinct functions that I think other people who will testify here today can explain that, Representative Sutherland, better than I. This would be more or less of a study for students. I believe the one at Orono is an information organization on labor issues primarily, and whereas I think the one we're talking about in Southern Maine would probably be primarily for instruction of students in labor studies.
Thank you.
And I had a question, Representative. I went to undergraduate school at Cornell University, and one of the schools in the university, and Cornell's a very interesting school in that part of it is state and other funded. For example, the one I'm going to talk about, plus the hotel school, which is world-renowned, largely funded by the Statler Corporation. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, Cornell's Industrial and Labor Relations, or INLR, program was partly funded by the AFL-CIO, I believe. And
right.
I've been out of school for a long time, so I'm not sure if it's still that same relationship. But the question I want to ask you is any thought, or did I miss it, that labor itself, the organized unions, would help to contribute in support of this venture.
Well, I think that in the process, as the bill progresses, I think those discussions will have to be approached from a funding aspect, and I would be willing to facilitate the dialogue if it would be acceptable to the committee.
I can't speak for the whole committee, but I presume that we're for collaboration, and we really like that
Especially
idea.
after the last couple of weeks. So
yeah,
I'm not going to mention any
No, sir.
specific issues, but I won't go there. But
Are there any other questions for Representative Tuttle? Thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'd like to give precedence to other legislators, and I see one right there. Senate President Edmonds.
Good morning, Senator Bowman, Representative Norton, esteemed members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. My name is Beth Edmonds. I'm the senator from District 10, which are the towns of Freeport, Brunswick, Harpswell, and Pownell. I come to you today in strong support of LD 123, an act to establish a labor center within the University of Maine system. The labor movement has a long and storied past. Many victories have been achieved over the past century that working men and women are still reaping the benefits of today. Among the most important are the minimum wage, collective bargaining rights, organizing rights, the 40-hour week, which I think we should adopt in the legislature. Oh, sorry. Overtime pay, child labor laws, workplace discrimination laws, health and safety regulations, unemployment compensation, and workers' compensation insurance. Workers of today would not recognize the workplaces of yesteryear where brutal conditions and a minimum pay were the norm. It's not just the victories, but the tragedies that are instructive for future generations. The violent revolts and uprisings so common at the turn of the last century should not be forgotten. Strikes that have torn apart communities right here in the state of Maine, whose wounds are still mending, should be studied and learned from. Lessons about corporate greed and abuse of union power that undoubtedly have an impact on how we view the worker-management relationship will hold value well into the future. It's important that we remember the lessons of the past and recognize how far workers have come in this industrialized era. It is for this reason that I believe a labor center should be established within the University of Maine system. This will expand our ability to educate future generations about the sacrifices made by others so that everyday people can share in the bounty that our country's economic success has brought forth. In response to an earlier question, I understand that there is and I'm aware of the program at the University of Maine at Orono. I do think this is a slightly separate function of trying to really engage students in the active study of the labor movement and its pros and cons and all that. It's not just for information purposes. So thank you very much for your kind attention this morning, and I strongly urge the committee to support this LD and provide the statutory authority necessary to establish a labor center within the University of Maine system. And I'd be, of course, happy to answer any questions that I'm able to.
Thank you, Senator Edmonds. Are there questions from the committee for Senator Edmonds? No, don't be intimidated. She's a wonderful, easily approached Representative Finch.
I'll take a shot at one.
Good.
I didn't have a question until your very last sentence. The statutory authority, my question is, without this bill, could the university do this anyway?
It's not my understanding that they can, but really and truly someone coming behind me may know better. That was my sense, that we're needed to give them statutory authority to do that. It's a great question. Okay. Thank you very much.
Further questions? That's it. Thank you, sir. Ma'am. Representative Bryant? Sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be here, but I'm Representative Mark Bryan from Wyndham. I represent part of Wyndham and Gray, but just with Brother Tuttle speaking and Madam President, I'm very humbled to come before them and you. Thank you. Esteemed members of the Education Committee, Senator Bowman, Representative Norton. I'm here today to support LD 123, an act to establish the Labor Center within the university's Maine system. As a displaced worker, I know firsthand our state's economy is in transition. While the Maine Department of Labor redefines its rapid response program, there is still significant need for both worker development and worker placement services throughout the state. However, we currently lack cohesive training and resource programs for those workers in the field. This labor center, as proposed, would provide an infrastructure of both qualified professionals and continuing education resources. Another benefit of the professional development of those assisted workers is a comprehensive curriculum that includes today's workforce needs as well as historic background and importance of a labor movement in this country. Though I am not a primary sponsor of this bill, I am an ardent supporter of this proposal. As others here today will speak in favor of this legislation, I am open to whatever questions the committee may have and will answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you for your consideration of this most important education program to aid Maine workers.
Thank you, Representative Bryan. Are there questions of Representative Bryan? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Are there other legislators that would like to present?
Good morning, Senator. I'm Herbie Clark. Good morning, Representative, distinguished members of the Education Committee. I'm State Representative Herb Clark from Millinocket, which includes Millinocket and East Millinocket Midway. I'm extremely proud to be here today in front of you as a co-sponsor of this bill. A little history, I am a 42-year member of the labor movement. It's hard to believe I worked at my employment now for 42 years this October and been active in unions ever since 1972. Or 1970, I'm going to go back to 65. Past executive board member of the Maine AFL-CIO. I'm presently the Secretary-Treasurer of the Katahdin Central Labor Council and a displaced worker, having worked for Great Northern Paper and losing our jobs after 38 and a half years and being called back to work, and extremely active in the labor AFL-CIO at the University of Maine in Orono over the years and see how it educated our rank and file when they needed some assistance throughout the workforce, particularly keeping it updated and whatever it may be. I strongly believe, I think the labor movement ought to be in the school systems because I think a lot of our children are missing the point what labor really consists of and what transpired to get them where they are today. Too many of our youth today think they're going to get what took me 40 years to get. They want it today and now and forgot how the history got them where they are. I'm a strong supporter of this movement going at the university in Southern Maine, and I think it's long overdue, and anything I can do to support it and work with this committee, I'd be more than happy to do that. With that, if there's any questions, I know you're extremely busy. You have other things on your plate. With that, I want to end my testimony. Thank you.
Just a couple of things on the plate. Are there questions for Representative Clark? Hearing and seeing none, thank you very much,
Thank you,
sir.
Senator.
Okay. Other legislators?
Thank you, Senator Bowman, Chairwoman Norton, members of the Education Committee. Are you still referred to as the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee?
Yes, we are.
Good, good, because I'm going to inject some culture into my testimony.
And there are a few affairs, and Robert Skoglund, you know, the humble farmer, he talked one night about veterans' affairs, but we...
And for David, I have a poem to distribute to you folks, and I'd be happy to provide more to the audience should it be requested. And I'd like to invoke the name of another cultural icon, Bob Marley. Bob Marley, if you don't know your past, you don't know your future. I, like Representative Herbie Clark and Representative Tuttle and Representative Bryant and many others here, have worked all my life. I come from working class roots. My father was a bus driver in the Bronx. But you know, I understand we live in a culture that denies that phrase that's used in the bill, I think working class. We believe that we live in a classless society, and I appreciate that. But there was an example of the reality that we don't live in a classless society. And the example uses the Titanic, which was, had a population that was divided into 3 socioeconomic strata, first, second, and third class passengers. And it's really interesting to look at this because of the first class passengers, there were 143 females, of which all survived but 4. Of the second-class passengers, there were 91, of which all but 15 perished. Of the third-class passengers, which were kept below deck at gunpoint as the ship was sinking, half of them perished. And this is an example used in a study that was conducted in 1948 titled Social Class and Mental Illness. It's an interesting study, and I would recommend that anybody interested in this review the study. This poem that I've given you is by Bertolt Brecht. It's titled Questions from a Worker Who Reads. I hope, I'm not going to read it to you, but I hope somebody behind me may do that. I don't think I can do it justice. But it's not part of the literature curriculum at any level in our educational system. I'm fortunate that I found it, just an excerpt of it in an archaeology magazine, and I've been sharing it ever since. This labor center is important to me because it has the potential for spreading my history amongst my people, those of us that work for wages. I know that somebody behind me will talk about that relationship between labor, wages, and capital, and it's an interesting discussion that's pretty much been absent from our discourse since probably 70 years ago. I know if you go back and look at magazines or newspaper articles from that period, the 1930s, you'll find some really wonderful discussions about things that we should be still talking about today, only we should be talking about them in the past tense. But because we're not talking about them, we're still suffering the ails that existed before. I'm going to get to the point. History, the way it's taught, there's a phrase, it comes from a headline back in the 1930s, a switch in time saved 9. Have any of you heard of it? Okay. Now, it pertains to a really pivotal case in the Supreme Courts, but when you study the history books about it, they only talk about it very superficially, very peripherally. They talk about it in the context of how this decision, this flipped decision, prevented Roosevelt from packing the courts. But the decision, the details of the decision, we don't learn about them in history. And I just want to share with you some of the points made in that decision, because I stood here in this State House last session talking about health care, the crisis, and talking about living wages. And this legislative body last year decided that we couldn't talk about what a living wage is. But now I'm going to talk about a Supreme Court that was perceived to be conservative. And they rendered a decision that empowers you as state legislators to protect the public health and safety, including, and they spoke very specifically about health care and the establishment of living wages. I've conducted a survey since I've learned about this case. It's called West Coast Hotel versus Parish. I've spoken to labor lawyers, I've spoken to teachers, I've spoken to history teachers and historians. They know about the switch in time, but they don't know about the case. And this case is as important to us as Brown versus the Board of Education or Roe Wade or any other Supreme Court decision that serves the establishment. This, I can tell you, does not serve the establishment, but it's a decision rendered by your Supreme Court 70 years ago. And they say that the legislature has the right to consider that a living wage requirement would be an important aid in carrying out its policy of protection of public health and safety. They also say that the exploitation portion of workers who are in an unequal position with respect to bargaining power and are thus relatively defenseless against the denial of a living wage is not only detrimental to their health and well-being, but casts a direct burden on their support upon the community. This is interesting because they're saying that paying less than a living wage imposes an unfair burden on taxpayers. This is part of labor history. This is part of our history. This is a decision made by our Supreme Court, but we don't talk about it because we don't know about it as we stand in that chamber and argue about whether or not what they did in Connecticut yesterday, establishing a single-payer universal health care system. Now, I don't know whether or not that'll survive their governor, but, you know, when we talk about these issues, this is empowering stuff. This is your Supreme Court. This is your history telling you that you have the power to do this. And you're pretty much deprived of this history because we don't teach it in our schools. So I'm going to let it go there. My point is simple. If you don't know your past, you don't know your future, and our school systems at all levels, as far as I'm concerned, has dropped the ball in perpetuating the reality of your history, because I'm presuming that you all work for wages at one point or another.
Thank you, Representative Burns. Are there any questions of the representative? Seeing none, thank you very much for your passionate presentation.
You're welcome.
Representative Burns. Are there any other legislators that would wish to speak? Seeing and hearing none, I will open it up to the general public, those in speaking in favor of the bill.
Good morning, Senator Bowman, Chairwoman Norton, esteemed members of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. My name is Michael Hillard. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Southern Maine, finishing my 21st year at USM, and I have taught labor history the entire time that I've been at the university. I'm here to speak on behalf of this proposal, which I've had a hand in developing over the last half a dozen years or so, and on behalf of the many faculty, numbering close to 10 from a variety of departments at the University of Southern Maine that have worked to try and see this bill become a possibility and the center become a possibility. And what I wanted to speak to you hopefully briefly about, and speaking briefly for college professors is a little tough because we usually think in complete 75-minute thoughts, but I know I don't have that kind of time this morning. I just want to speak briefly about the origins of the proposal and what we as the faculty will do if this center becomes a reality. Before I get to that, let me just say as a general point, some of the previous speakers, and I do want to thank Speaker Cummings, Senate President Edmonds, the many representatives, including those who spoke today, who are sponsoring the bill. It's really very, very exciting to see the kind of notice and support emanate from the leadership of the state on this subject. I want to speak very briefly, as others have spoken more at length, at why something like this is very important at this point in time and why at the University of Southern Maine. It's a commonplace that if you go to any branch of the University of Maine system, you will find a business program. And in the larger institutions, you see full-fledged business schools that have upwards of 40 or 50 full-time faculty. No such analogous institutions exist, save for the Bureau of Labor Education at the University of Maine, Orono. There's an imbalance there because the majority of people in this state are working people, and the perspective and the issues of the working class deserve study, both at the point of view of the student and in the scholarship that faculty at the universities conduct. So that's why I think this is a very important proposal. This idea came about because of a long-standing and growing collaboration between local labor activists in Southern Maine and the faculty and students at USM. We've been collaborating on labor education activities on an ad hoc basis, certainly for the 21 years I've been at USM, going back to bringing speakers from both sides of the issue to discuss the J strike back in the 1980s, right up to much more recent forums on things like all the issues of women in work, looking at the issue of workers' compensation and a whole variety of other things. One thing that changed in the last 10 years is that USM has accumulated a critical mass of faculty, not in one department, but spread across many departments that all have scholarly interests in labor and working class studies. And with that critical mass, it became clear about 5 or 6 years ago that we had a lot to bring to the table on both sides, and we began to formally collaborate on trying to build a more permanent and sustained institution at the University of Southern Maine. So since that time, we've been doing strategic planning on curriculum, community labor education, policy development, and scholarship of the working class. What we will do if we have the opportunity to have this center, we believe that the funding and the entity will act as a catalyst for the kinds of efforts that we've had, but really bring them to a higher level. Our first and foremost interest is in expanding curriculum at the University of Southern Maine. Our previous collaborations has created a labor studies minor at USM, and Jerry Lestage, one of my former students, will be here to speak about that in a second. We're very interested in developing a master's degree in working class studies, which is a new model. Senator Bowman talked about the very esteemed and well-known program at Cornell in industrial labor relations, which is actually my field. I know the work of that institution quite well. What's emerged in the last 20 years is a very different model of scholarship and curriculum on labor, because industrial labor relations is focused primarily on unionized workers, and as we know, the vast majority of workers are not represented by unions. And so the scholarship has shifted to a focus that we want to include the working class, whether or not they're part of organized labor as well, or not. And that would be the focus for a master's program. There is currently a master's program at Youngstown State that we would model ourselves upon. Policy analysis. How do the public policies and the social and economic trends in Maine impact working people? We would develop collaborations between members of the labor movement and faculty and students at USM to develop policy analysis that would bring the perspective of the working class on these issues to the public. And last but not least, also scholarship to continue to encourage and support the internationally recognized work of USM faculty on this subject. And I can just say that I am among a number of people at USM in the fields of American New England Studies, economics, sociology, geography, who are internationally recognized scholars on the subject of labor and working class studies. But the problem that we face is that we're in separate departments. We tend to be the faculty who our departments turn to us to do most of the hard work of our own department. It is very hard to free ourselves to collaborate, although we have in many ways. By creating this center and creating some resources behind it, we believe it will really bring us together and create an identity for USM that will be very beneficial to the citizens of Maine and will be internationally recognized, or at least nationally recognized across the United States as a very distinct kind of program. So I'll stop there, and I'd be very happy to take any questions that any of you would have.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions for Professor Hilliard? Seeing and hearing none, thank you, sir.
Okay, again, thank you very much.
I see a distinguished Speaker of the House, so Representative and Speaker Cummings, please step forward.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative Norton and members of the Education Committee. I'm Glenn Cummings, and I've realized I forgot to pass out my testimony. Hold on a second.
And I want to remind people to sign in. Professor, did you sign? You did. Yeah, okay, great. I just want to make sure that everybody does that.
My testimony says good afternoon, but you guys are hardworking on a Wednesday morning here. So Senator Bowman and Representative Norton and other distinguished members of the committee, of Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. This feels so familiar over here. So, and I did send candy the first time, right? Okay, good. I don't know whether every time I'm supposed to do that or not. I'm the Speaker of the House, Glenn Cummings. I'm from Portland. I'm here today to speak in testimony in favor of LD 123, an act to establish a labor center within the University of Maine system. Too often, I would say that our textbooks ignore working people. And having taught economics at USM and now full-time at SMCC for a long time, I have to tell you the textbooks do a great job of covering how capital moves, how corporations move, how entities like supply and demand come together, and how they create pricing systems. What they don't talk about is what it means to be probably the largest percentage of the labor force, which is to be labor, and be part of labor, and to be part of the working people, men and women who make up this country, and who work every day in a variety of capacities, both white collar and blue collar. And that gap, I think, is significant to the education of our kids at the high school level and at the college level. And this Labor Institute, which you've heard from Dr. Hillard and others today, the purpose behind it would be to tell those stories, to integrate it into basic textbooks, both macro and micro, to be able to help us understand the patterns of labor here in the state, and to help us face the issues that are facing America and the state from the perspective of those who live it every day in our workforce. So I feel very strongly about it. I've seen the importance of this in terms of our students and making them take time to do projects and research papers that not only follow the line of capital, but follow the line of the people who actually make capital into something productive. So I will stop right there, but I would strongly be enthused about this. I will make a pledge to help if you can move this on to appropriations, I'll do my share to try to make sure that it gets some level of funding, because I know you want to be responsible to the bottom line as well, but we will try our best, and if you think it's a good policy investment, which I do, and it sends the right message about education and about our working people in the state, I will try to help find the money for you on the appropriations table if we can. I can't make a promise to that, but I can promise that I will work to make that happen. So with that, I'll open it up to questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are there any questions of the Speaker? Maybe I need to shoot some adrenaline in people this morning, but really appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
It feels a lot like my 8 o'clock class.
Yeah. Are there others that wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Good morning, Senator Bowman, Representative Norton, members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. My name is Jeremy Lestage. I'm a resident of Portland. I've lived in Maine my entire life. You may know me as the committee clerk for the Joint Standing Committees on Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. I'm here today on my own personal time and with the permission of the presiding officers to express my support for LD 123, an act to establish a labor center within the University of Maine system. I want to thank Representative Tuttle for presenting this very important bill. I am a graduate of the University of Southern Maine. In 2004, I received my degree in criminology with a minor in labor studies. I am currently pursuing a master's in public policy from the Muskie School. I just want to say I don't envy the position that this committee has been in the past couple of weeks with the biennial budget. Representative Edgecombe's filled me in. He is on the Agriculture Committee. I hope that this committee will see that the benefits of a labor center at the University of Southern Maine far outweigh the costs associated with it. Not only will this center give more options to students in the state of Maine, but it will help to build a community organizational structure and advance and increase the knowledge of labor history and labor issues within the University of Maine system. It is not appropriate for me to discuss where the funds will come from to pay for this program, but I will say that labor education that USM provided me has served me well. I originally became interested in labor issues because of my father, Tom Lestage. He worked for Sappi Fine Paper in Westbrook and was involved in labor issues through most of his career there. Westbrook High School did not expose me to labor history with any depth. As a student at USM, I found that even my college U.S. history since 1877 course did not broach the subject any deeper. I found out about the labor studies minor from my father's conversations with Professor Hillard, and I chose to pursue the labor studies minor. Labor history and labor issues helped to spice up my USM experience, and had I had the opportunity to pursue it further, I would have. My labor studies courses opened up a part of history that was largely neglected in my previous history courses. We all learned about the Industrial Revolution in U.S. history, but we were not told the stories of child laborers working 12 to 14 hours a day with minimal breaks. We were not told about the accidents that indiscriminately killed these children. We were not told how the 8-hour day came to be or the issues that led to the creation of OSHA. This Labor Studies Center will bring that history and these issues to light in an educational community that wants to be enlightened to these issues. It is in the university and the state's best interest that you support this measure. If a program like this had existed sooner, my college experience would have been much different, and I'm sure that many others would have as well. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have. And I apologize for being nervous.
That's all right. All of us are that way one or more times in our lives. Thank you, Mr. Lestage. Any questions from the committee? Seeing and hearing none, thank you, sir, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Are there others that wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Good morning, Senator Bowman, Representative Norton, ladies and gentlemen of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. My name is Ed Gorham. I'm a resident of Randolph, Maine, and I'm here today representing the Maine AFL-CIO in support of LD 123. I'd urge you to pass this bill out unanimously and send it on to the Appropriations Committee and let us take our chances there to get the funding for it. Those who have presented so far have given an explanation of what's intended with the Labor Center, with the Labor Studies at Southern Maine. I just want to give you a brief history, if I may, of what is out there now with respect to the Bureau of Labor Education that some of you have mentioned, that is part of the Public Service Division of the university, out of the University of Maine in Orono, the land-grant university, the moral grant university for the state of Maine. This is the first time in 142 years since the university's been there that we've had a bill come forth that will attempt to put labor into the mainstream of the offerings of the university system, as opposed to the Bureau, which is, as I mentioned, is part of the Public Service Department of the university. It was created in 1966 in a supplemental budget with unallocated language and a $50,000 request for money from the Appropriations Committee at the urging of Governor John Reed. And every governor since John Reed has, at one point or another, in some cases multiple times, had to pick up the phone and call the University of Maine at Orono and talk to the president or talk to the chancellor or talk to trustees about continuing the program and the activities of the Bureau of Labor Education. I suspect because of the way it was created with, as I said, unallocated language in the budget and a line for the Bureau in the budget, all of which really ticked off the university system and the the University of Maine at the time and the trustees, that the legislature would dare to tell them what to do. So there's, at the beginning, just from the start, there was an institutional bias against that particular bureau within the university. And as I mentioned, we have had over the years to have every governor since Governor Reed, including Governor Baldacci, pick up the phone and make a pitch for the continued survival of the Bureau of Labor Education. So when I ask you to pass this bill out, creating the new Labor Studies program for USM, I don't want you to just pass the bill. I want you to keep up an interest in it and to help promote it and help push it, and at every opportunity ask the university what they're doing for it. Because without that, it'll go through the same kinds of cycles that the Bureau of Labor Education has had to go through, where funding sometimes is adequate, but is usually way below what it should be, and it's a struggle even to keep it going. We don't want to have the same kind of struggle with this Labor Studies program to keep it going. We want it to become an integral part of the university system, much as the program is at Cornell. I'll be happy to answer any questions that I may.
Are there any questions? Representative Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Gorham, thank you. One of the things I know from being involved with academia myself, do you know if there are any possibilities for outside funding that could support the continuation of the program? Because that's one of the things that would interest a university in at least the startup funds for such an institute.
I am not aware of any funds of that nature available, but I'm certainly willing to help look for it.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Gorham?
Thank you.
Hearing none and seeing none, thank you very much, sir. Are there others that wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Senator Bowman, Representative Norton, members of the Joint Standing Committee on Education and Cultural Affairs. I'm also high on the Cultural Affairs side, and I wanted to refer you to begin. First of all, my name is Peter Kelman. I'm a resident of North Berwick, Maine. I'm president of the Southern Maine Labor Council, and we represent 20 local unions with about 9,000 members in York, Cumberland, and Saginaw County. And I've been working with the good professor here for about 20 years on this program. This didn't just start yesterday. We've been working on it for a long time, and I think one of our fruits, a good example of the fruit of our labors, you heard when Jeremy testified. But I want to talk a little bit about culture in a way that Representative Burns passed you a poem called Questions from a Worker Who Reads. I'm just going to read the first couple lines. Who built Thebes of the 7 gates? In the books you will find the name of kings. And I think that summarizes everything that we're trying to do. We're not talking about kings. We're talking about the people that do the work. I was substitute teaching a number of years ago in SAD 60, and I was in an 8th grade social studies class. And they had a series of books there on American history, and they covered 30 years each. And I picked the one up that went from 1918 up for the next 30 years. And I'm a labor historian. And you can imagine the kind of things I looked for in the index. Strike, union, labor, Flint, Michigan, on and on. There was nothing in there, nothing. There was nothing about working people or unions in that entire book of that period. And I dare to say that if the working people of this country hadn't risen up when we had 30% unemployment in the 1930s, we wouldn't have Social Security today. We wouldn't have unemployment insurance today. We wouldn't have had any of that. There wouldn't have been a New Deal. And that's not even in there. And so our purpose really is to address what's missing with this program. Just a few examples, I think, of where we're coming from. I think it's really a demonstration of Jeffersonian democracy. I mean, most people associate Jeffersonian democracy with the notion that everybody will be a farmer and we'll all be equal and we can go to our legislature as equals and we'll have a democratic form of government. Well, that was a great idea. The problem was that after a while, people started not working on the farms. And in 1832, there was an organization formed in Portland called the Workingmen's Parties. And there were a number of parties around the country at that time with that name. And they had 2 goals. One was the 10-hour day, and the other was public education. And there was a reason that they linked the 2 things together. And the reason is this, that they believed that an informed citizenry, that in order to have a Republican form of government, people had to be educated. Not about the tasks at hand. They know how to build things. They wanted to be educated in democracy. And they realized that if they were working 14 or 16 hours a day, they would never have the time to be educated to participate in a democracy. And so that's what they fought for. And when I talk about the beginnings of the struggle for the 8-hour day, it always begins with the 10-hour day and the link to democracy. When we urge you, and I urge you, and the people that I represent urge you, to create this labor center at the University of Maine, it's so that we can continue this notion of Jeffersonian democracy. And that's the end of my testimony. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. And I remember when you first approached me several weeks ago on this issue, and that was the first I heard about it, and I was pleased to hear about it. Are there any questions? Hearing and seeing none. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Are there others that wish to speak in favor of this bill?
Senator Bowman and Representative Norton and members of the committee, appreciate the chance to testify in favor of the Labor Center. I'm Duncan Wright, and I am a psychiatrist in Portland. I came to know about the labor movement in an indirect way. I saw lots of people when working in an emergency room who had no insurance and who were suffering or dying as a result. In fact, I should say parenthetically, 18,000 people a year die in the U.S. for not having, because they don't have health insurance, according to an Institute of Medicine study. So that got me interested in how do we get a government-guaranteed care of the sick for every resident of Maine. And in studying the history about how other countries got such a guarantee, one of the key elements was a strong, active trade union federation. And every country has gotten universal health care, which is 27 out of 29 industrialized countries. Trade unions have been instrumental in every one. So that's how I got to know the labor unions here. The reason that I bring that up is that labor unions are not just in favor of their own interests. They're promoting a certain vision of society, which includes such things as guaranteed care when you are sick. And I think that's one of the purposes of the Labor Center, is really to promote a certain vision of society which is based on more on solidarity, more on mutual aid than some other visions of society. When I was in high school, I read a lot of good books and had good history courses, but I didn't learn anything really about the history of the people who built the buildings that I was in, or the people that wired the buildings that I was in. And if I look around this room at this beautiful desk that you're all sitting at, someone made that and made this whole room, and their voices need to be heard. I also think that maybe this is sort of a psychiatrist's point of view, but I think when there's something that's very important that's happened, like the construction of this room, that's not spoken about, it's obviously just demoralizing to the people who built it. But it's also not healthy for a society to keep things silent that actually are very important, no matter whether you happen to agree with the politics of the person who built this desk or not. It's not healthy. It doesn't create a democracy, and psychologically it's bad, I think. So I think one question about the center would be, is this sort of promoting a quote-unquote special interest, the special interests of labor? And I think, for the reasons that I've mentioned, that it's really about a vision of a good society, not special interest. So in conclusion, I'd say, here's a slogan for you. The Labor Center, not a special interest, just special. Vote for it.
Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
in case Mr. Wright, in case we have any
Yes.
questions, but I really appreciate the cultural lesson that we're all getting here, so it's very meaningful to me. Are there any questions of Mr. Wright? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Are there others wishing to speak in favor of the bill?
Senator Bowman and Representative Norton, members of the committee. My name is Tim Belcher. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine State Employees Association, SCA Local 1989, a union of 12,000 members spread around throughout the state, including mostly state employees, but also a number of other workers, both in the private and public sector. And I'm really here today to speak to you as a proud alumnus of the University of Massachusetts Labor Relations Center master's program. which I graduated from a long, long time ago, 1980. And I share that distinction with a number of people who probably have been spending, some of them spending some time in front of you, like Mark Gray from the MEA, and Ned McCann, formerly of the AFL-CIO, Carl Lenanen, formerly from my union, a number of other people, David Wagner from the social work department at USM. And I mention all those names because there are a lot of people who've gone through and through these kinds of programs and come out and contributed in sort of important ways, I think, to being able to advance the cause of working people in the state of Maine. When we do our job well, those of us in the labor movement, the professionals like myself who have some education, I think when we do well, you're not hearing from us, but you're hearing from our members, from people who maybe don't have even more than a high school education, but we make it possible through these organizations for people in power, people who make the important decisions in our lives, who make policy for the whole state and for the whole country, to hear the voice of working people. You've heard a lot of the prior speakers talk about the past and about the importance of remembering and studying the past, and I would echo those, but I also want to talk a little bit about the future. We're in a position now in the state where working people are not generally keeping up with the pace of the increases in productivity that technology is allowing, that their hard work is producing. We have situations where working people do not have the kind of effective voice that they had when the labor movement was stronger 10, 15, 20 years ago. We have situations where people are not getting the time off to spend with their kids. They're working longer hours. They're not getting the health care that was delivered through the collective bargaining system. And I think that we have a consensus. We have a lot of things that divide us along various ideological lines in this country, but I think in this state we have a consensus that, yes, working people really should get the benefits of increased productivity. Really, people should be able to have organizations that that can speak for them and through which they can advance their cause within the economy, and that it's important for those issues to be able to be brought forward both at an enterprise level and also at a broader social level. And we have a labor movement that is in crisis. I mean, let's just be blunt about that, and that needs to rethink itself. And we need to have organizations that can think about what it means to be a working person in the state of Maine in the 21st century. And that may mean, yes, it may mean that unions take on different roles. It may mean that other organizations, the Women's Lobby, other organizations that are active on employment issues, step up and take on a different role. And to be able to do that kind of work, to be able to think about those kinds of things in the future, we need young people who are in university settings with the time to think about these things, hear from professors who are studying these matters and have really thought about it with some perspective. It really makes a difference. It really makes a difference to have that kind of crucible where you can develop these kinds of ideas. We need that. My union is trying to find ways to organize new workers. We've been successful in large extent. We're getting people to sign up. To be able to do that work, we're looking around and we're hiring. We've been hiring bright young people out of the university system. They're great people. They do good work. We exploit them mercilessly. But to be able to do the work effectively, they need to know about the system. And we need to be able to, we need to be able to hire people who've got that kind of training. Professor Hilliard was absolutely right that USM has, I think by chance, maybe by design, developed, become blessed with a really good core of people professors who really know this stuff, a really good pool of talent. I think that there's an opportunity for this program to really be a national model, almost along the lines of the Cornell School that Senator Bowman was referring to. And I urge you to support this. I think this is an exciting opportunity. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Representative Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask you the same question I asked Mr. Gorham. one of the things academia looks for is continued support for programs, and I'm wondering if you see any potential for getting grants or scholarships from sources to support a program if this is instituted at the USM.
I don't have any money in my pocket right now, although I'd be happy to give a small contribution from my own pocket. But in terms of looking for grants and trying to shake some money out of the labor movement, I'd be happy to help conduct that effort. Thanks. Anything else?
Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any others who wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Senator Bowman, Representative Norton, other members of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. My name is Chris Galgay, and I am presently the president of the Maine Education Association, representing 25,000 educators across this country. I'll be brief if I could, but just to, because I've been back there listening to all the testimony and total agreement, and as someone who represents 25,000 educators, we clearly understand that education is the great equalizer. And so I encourage you to support this bill, because as someone who grew up in another state and was involved in labor, I have seen over the last 20 to 30 years that movement losing its momentum. And I think part of it is, it was pointed out earlier about it not being in our history books, that we may be into the at least second generation of students who have no knowledge of what the labor movement did in this country. And as someone who grew up in a blue-collar family, I understood it was the great equalizer. I've always felt that it created the middle class, and I know a lot of my union brothers and sisters agree with me. And I see, as we all know, we seem to be heading to another two-class society, the rich and the poor, and the middle class disappearing. So I encourage you to support this bill. I've heard questions about funding. I've been up here over the last couple of weeks several times speaking on bills and been asked, where's the money coming from? And my answer back to the representatives has been, sometimes you as elected officials need to just do the right thing. I don't know if it's our job here to figure out where the money comes from. And so I encourage you to support this. Thank you very much, and I'll entertain any questions.
Representative Edgecombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did I not hear correctly? I thought I heard you represent 25,000 teachers across this country.
I'm sorry, the state.
State.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry. That's what I get for not writing it down.
We have a real sharp committee, as you can see.
Yeah, oh, man.
So, Representative Marcus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, my point was not that we find other sources for the funding, but I think that that's one way that to say that there's a possibility for supplemental funding to what we can give. That was my point, because I think that helps.
Are there any other? Representative Harwell. Harlow, excuse me. I made that mistake once before. It's because I knew somebody named the former.
Thank you, Chairman Bauman.
They never cut me any slack. Thank you, Representative
No
Harlow.
disrespect meant. No disrespect meant. I just have one question. Now, I taught history. Am I the only one of the 25,000 teachers that taught about the labor movement?
I can't answer that question.
Well, that's what I've heard today.
Yeah.
And am I the only person in this room that ever walked out on a strike?
I doubt it.
Pretty near, I'll bet. 40 years ago in the paper companies.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak in favor of the bill?
Good morning. I think it's still morning. Senator Bowman, Representative Norton, distinguished members of the Education Committee. My name is Ben Collings, and I'm not here on behalf of any group. I just received an email when I got home last night about this this public hearing, and I decided to come in. I think everyone here probably has spoken a lot more articulately and has a lot more knowledge, but I wanted to bring a new perspective